Welcome to the Miller Report Real Clear Journalism. I'm Maggie Miller. Today I'm discussing James Varney's latest investigation into the rule of law, where he took a visit into an immigration court in New Orleans. To give an overview of his investigation, every weekday morning migrants who have entered the U.S. many years ago file into immigration courtrooms like the one in New Orleans. For many, it's their first official appearance since arriving in the country, and the system is overloaded. They know that time is on their side. The U.S. immigration court system is now handling over 3.6 million pending cases. One recent morning saw nearly 140 people scheduled just in that one New Orleans courtroom. Using a combination of appeals, continuances, and motions to reopen, some migrants are effectively running out the clock, delaying deportation for years, sometimes more than 6. A former judge noted how surprising it was how well some of these non-citizens understood how to work the system. But the Biden-era approach is giving way to a sharper Trump-era strategy. Immigration and Customs Enforcement has begun dismissing cases, only to then immediately detain some of those same individuals as they leave the courthouse. That move shuttles them into expedited removal proceedings, stripping away bond eligibility and other protections. The fear of being arrested at court is already prompting some to potentially skip their hearings altogether, which could result in absentia deportation orders. Certain immigration attorneys are now concerned over due process. Many immigrants plead for asylum, which could also trigger yet another future court date, often years away. The courtroom dynamics in places like New Orleans can mirror the growing unrest across our nation. As I speak with James about his investigation, we're going to be discussing in the context of what is happening across our country. The courtroom dynamics in places like New Orleans mirroring growing national unrest as ICE ramps up enforcement and protesters mobilize in cities across the country. Ambush-style arrests outside of immigration courts have sparked outrage, with critics saying that they erode due process and spread fear in immigrant communities. Supporters argue that the tactics are necessary to restore control. As these protests mount, the tension between immigration enforcement and civil liberties is coming to a head, both in the streets and in the courts. I'm joined now by the lead investigator on this story, James Varney. James, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So your piece is very timely, as so much of our country's attention is currently on immigration. Can you tell me a bit about your findings and then how it relates to what we're seeing play out across the country?
Well, exactly how things are playing out is why we decided to do it. So you have all these headlines on the immigration front with steps the Trump administration is taking with arrests and deportations, and they tend to be focused on the high-profile things like people getting sent to detention centers in El Salvador and whatnot. But of the millions of people who came across in the last 4 years, the majority of these cases are going to be decided one way or another in immigration court. So we had gone there in 2022 and taken a look at a few days. We just decided to repeat that now and see if anything had changed under Trump.
And so what did you find?
Well, things have changed. For one thing, and this is something that both attorneys and court officials told me, there's a lot more detention now. So, for example, in the morning, they have what is called master calendar hearings. And that's essentially a first hearing for most everybody. Immigrants will get what they call a notice to appear. And they're called in court parlance, alien respondents. So many of these people have gotten a notice to appear and they show up on the master calendar. In most of the cases that we saw, this was last month, they had gotten their NTA in 2023. Or a few in December of last year. But as you can see, 2 years more or less before they even show up. All right. So there was also a hearing, however, held via like a Zoom thing, with people that were detained in Jena, Louisiana. And probably a lot of your viewers know about that because there's been headlines about the Columbia student and different high-profile immigrants that the Trump administration has shipped there, and they're detaining them there. So this entire hearing was held with people that were in detention. And that was one of the big changes.
And so what did you find most surprising about your time in court?
Well, I think there's a couple things. One is there's a lot of talk about due process and exactly what rights people appearing before the court have or don't have. Okay, so they don't have a Sixth Amendment right to representation as you or I would. But the court will tell them that we've got a list of attorneys who will do this at affordable rates or pro bono. And then when they request representation, that's another delay. So they will probably then get, in our case, it was in May. They're supposed to come back in December. But you do see almost everybody that was listed on the master calendar was showing up, albeit some of them had no choice because they were in Jinnah. So that was one big difference. And then another thing that had changed quite a bit was in 2022, when we went, the Biden administration was doing something that they called prosecutorial discretion. This came out of the Doyle Memorandum, which essentially was a get out of court free pass. And the judge would say to the person that you are free to go and live your life, and the government has no interest in pursuing you or removing you. Now you see the lawyers for ICE, the government attorneys in the hearing, saying that they no longer consider this person an enforcement priority and they want to drop the charges. But as one of the judges pointed out, and this again is an example of them getting the due process, that doesn't change their status. So if they're still removable, those are the people that you've read some stories about getting arrested right outside the courthouse. And the judge even said, I want to make sure that everybody understands what's happening here and the sort of position that it will leave the alien respondent in after the hearing. But that was a very big difference. So I did see that due process did seem to definitely be given, and there was a more aggressive approach being taken by the government lawyers.
So, how do we manage making sure that these people don't just sit in our systems for years on end while also giving them that due process?
That's a good question. There's a backlog right now of about 3.5, more or less, 3.5 million people. More than 2 million of those are asylum claims. So simply going through all of that is going to take quite a while. Now, by more or less cutting off all the traffic across the borders and the massive river of illegal immigration that we had for the last 4 years, that means there's fewer people coming into the system at the beginning. And that hopefully will allow them to winnow down the caseload. However, if people think that they're going to get arrested if they go to court, that could influence their behavior and you might have fewer people showing up. So I do think that it's something they're cognizant of and that they're trying to fix. But to your question about time, I don't think there's an easy answer for that.
It just seems like, I mean, especially your article was talking about how people understand the system, and if they
Correct.
wait until they get there and then they're like, oh, I would like a lawyer, but I don't have one, then it punts it down the road. So, I mean, it just seems like, I mean, even if I went to court, there's ways to make things draw out. So I think
Absolutely. Yeah,
it's just
I mean, delays and continuances, right? That's like a time-honored defense lawyer's mechanism. But what you've got also is errors, things like this. So, for example, the asylum hearings, those take place in the afternoon, and you have to get permission from the judge or the person who's making the asylum claim to observe it. And we did get that for two hearings. The second one, though, at the end of it, the government attorney kind of looked at his computer and said, Judge, this wasn't scheduled as an asylum hearing. This was scheduled as a master calendar hearing for the alien respondent, the woman from El Salvador. And the judge was like, oh, my goodness. So they had to set a new court date. And it was, I think, in 2026 or 2029. I'm forgetting the date, but years in advance. So every step of the way takes a lot of time.
it just kind of, I mean, taking a step back, obviously you spent the time in court, but it's just with everything that, all the discussions that are happening right now, everything surrounding ICE, everything surrounding the protesting across our country, it's just, you wonder, it's like, I mean, ICE, the people who are saying that ICE is just doing their job, and then there's the people that are saying that they're encroaching on civil liberties. It feels like they are doing their job with what you were describing with they can get these people outside of the courtroom, even though it kind of brings up the ethical, like, should you? So it's kind of it's a tough kind of balancing act to do.
Yeah, and I don't think that the judges or the people involved in the immigration court system, which is a massive system, by the way. There's more than 700 judges, and they got them from Massachusetts and Saipan and Puerto Rico and Washington State. So I don't think any of the people that are involved in that are really that concerned with all the stuff you're talking about, right? Everything from the judge in Milwaukee helping someone, to the riots in Los Angeles, to the arrest outside the courtrooms and all that we've heard. I think they're just focused on more or less what's in front of them. And I think one of the things that's also happening that people probably don't fully understand is that the asylum hearings don't usually go in the immigrant's way. And it's not because the stories they're telling aren't real or they aren't heartbreaking, because they are.
Specific things that they need to reach, correct?
You can get asylum, and this is not a Trump law. This has been U.S. law for a long time, for race or sex or religion or membership in certain social groups or credible fear of torture. And unfortunately, economic hardship isn't grounds for asylum. And I don't know if they fine-tuned this, but it used to also be that you were supposed to request asylum, I think, in the first country you went to after your country, after you left. And of course, many of these people have gone through Central America before they got to the U.S. and didn't say anything about asylum until they got to the U.S. So the other asylum hearing that we heard was a couple from Honduras, and the judge told them he denied their asylum claim, but he told them, "I find you credible witnesses. I believe what you're telling me. I think it's true, and it's terrible what's happening for some of these people in Honduras, but unfortunately, it's not grounds for asylum."
I mean, I think you just mentioned it just before. It's like they have 3.6 million cases. They're trying to do what they can for each of these people and get them through the process. So it's not going to be another 10, 15 years before we find out everybody's fates and whether or not they get to stay in the country. So I think they're just kind of keeping their head above water at this point.
Yeah, and I think that most of the people, certainly the majority of the people that I saw in person in immigration court, they appear to be fine, upstanding people, right? They're making their court appearances. They're well dressed. They don't appear to be living on the streets or anything. They're not engaged in any criminal behavior. So as I said a moment ago, you feel bad for them, but nonetheless, they're trying to follow the law here. So that makes it hard. I think also you've got a real difference between an arrest outside the courtroom that you just mentioned. There might be, differences of opinion or ethics or whatever you want to call it on whether or not we should be doing that. And these kind of sweep arrests that we see ICE making of people with serious criminal charges against them that have just been floating around and nothing's been done. So I think those are two different things. And the one at the court is, I don't know how to word this because I don't want to sound like I'm discriminating against anybody, but I think it's the classical kind of immigrants that everybody talks about this country's been built on. And I think that's a difference that a lot of people don't realize.
So what would you want to leave people with?
I think that you and I have talked about this before, and I think again, perspective is really important. Okay, I mean, history didn't start on January 20th. A lot of this what we're seeing is a response to things that happened under the Biden administration, and so it might be that the pendulum is swinging too far one way, just as it swung too far the other way. I think some balance is going to be found on all of this. You and I are talking here in June of 25, so Trump's been in office, what, 5.5 months? It's a very it's a very short time. People are up in arms, for example, about the 3,000 arrests a day. You might have seen some stories about that supposedly they have a quota. Well, mathematically, they'd have to be doing 8,000 a day if you wanted to remove everybody that came in the last 4 years. I don't think that should be the goal or that it is the goal or that it's reasonable. But I do think that the more sort of aggressive approach that we see is probably welcome by most Americans. And I think they would be pleasantly surprised if they saw how officious and by the book the immigration courts are working right now.
And I mean, to be fair to obviously what people are saying is a way more go and get them Trump era policy. I mean, he's not the first president that has done extensive deportations. So it's just kind of where they stand and how they're getting things done that I think people are, maybe finding issue with. So it's all in the eye of the beholder, but hopefully, things continue to move well with these courts and maybe you'll get to go in another year and check out the progress then.
I hope so too.
Well, James, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, Maggie.
That was it for the Miller Report, Real Clear Journalism. I'm Maggie Miller. I'll see you next time.